little anecdote. I was listening to NPR today, and there was this guy named George Wein, who's a famous jazz producer. And he was talking about a concert, a jazz festival that took place in 1971, and Dionne Warwick was about to sing, and there was this riot. They called it a riot. It didn't sound really like a riot, but they called it a riot. And all these people broke down a fence and streamed into the field. And they had to cancel the concert. And he said, yeah, because there was this thing back then where people thought music should be free. And I thought to myself, oh my God, this goes back to 1971. Who would have ever figured? I thought it was because of Napster. Apparently, some of this stuff goes really deep. Media itself is a fascinating case of free. It's, in a sense, it's always been free, right? Back before, cable and satellite TV. TV was free. Radio was free. But the music you bought, you owned, was always bought, right? Until 1999 and Napster launched, right? So there is something maybe a little bit special going on, and Stuart Brand, the founder of the Whole Earth Catalog, said it. This is a very, very oft-quoted quote that says, "Information wants to be free." In his book, Anderson says, if it's digital, sooner or later it's going to be free. Okay, so show of hands again. Those people who are going to sell something, is it digital? People who are trying to sell it for money, is it digital? Well, he says it's going to be free, right?
It's not that kind of free. It's talking about a different kind of free.
Yeah, and I think someone in the audience said it's not that kind of free; it's a different kind of free, and that's an absolutely fair comment. And I won't talk about different sorts of free much, and maybe we can talk about those, and you guys can discuss at the tables afterwards. But it's a very good point. So let's talk a little bit about one of the key points that Anderson does say about a very specific kind of free, which is that when a service has increasing marginal returns to scale, in other words, when it's cheaper to serve the n plus 1th customer, n plus 1st customer, versus the nth customer, then in the end, that service will be offered by someone for free. Now, monopolies change this, and there's a lot of argumentation about that point, but there's something to that. So a related but sort of different argument, which was articulated by my friend, is that if the good you are selling becomes available in infinite supply, then it ought to be free. Richard Stallman at the Free Software Foundation was pushing this for software in a pretty big way. Now, I just think as an aside, it's kind of interesting what's happened with the web, because Stallman kind of imagined this world where programmers basically worked for charity or very little money, and all of what they created was free, and it was just given away, and it was one big happy software neighborhood, and you all shared your code. It was all cool. The reality is that almost every software programmer today works on proprietary software, even if they're working on the most open, best distribution platform for software that has ever been created, the net. Why is that? Because they're creating web services. And all of you guys who are working on web services, for the most part, are creating proprietary software that is going to be delivered as a service one way or another to your customers. So it's kind of an interesting coda to that story of free software. Now, there is plenty of free software out there, sure, and one could argue that it's been a success story from that perspective alone, but there's more paid. So information wants to be free. The fascinating thing about music is that it's really not free at the same time as it's offered for free. IP holders, who in the end own the rights to the music, they charge everyone who doesn't technically steal their product. They charge everyone to play or own the music they created. And let's be clear about this. They're invested with the right to do so by the governments, by all the governments, essentially, around the world. Now, whether they should have this right or not is a subject of a much different conversation. But it does sort of leave a paradox. Music, as this infinite good, wants to be free. But most musicians, the creators, most, not all, but most, and rights holders, all, except for the musicians perhaps, some musicians, don't want it to be. So we're left with this distinctly uncomfortable situation where there's lots of free, but it's either piracy or truly, vastly unprofitable. And you know, a business is like a shark, right? If it doesn't get its profit, if it doesn't keep moving, it's not going to last. And we've seen that, and a lot of the free services are having a lot of troubles. Okay, so let's talk some strategy around free, and I want to talk briefly about what we've done at Lala and how we've tried to split the horns of this dilemma, and then talk about what it might mean for a startup thinking about free. First, we tried to change the story, think a little bit out of the box. We created a new model for music where instead of it's either free or you pay $1, we said, well, there's going to be a lot of free. We're going to let you stream your collection in the cloud for free. But our real purpose is to get you to listen and purchase new music. And the way that model works is you can't listen to anything on Lala, including your own collection, but anything in our catalog that isn't in your collection for free just once. So we have these arguments ad nauseum with the music labels saying we are not a free streaming service. It's a full-length preview. It's like the 30-second sample thing, but it doesn't suck. Put another way, I go to them, so if you went to a car dealership and they were going to show you a car, would you be happy if they showed you one with no paint, no wheels, no steering wheel? What are you doing when you're trying to sell your product? You've got to put it in the best light possible. And they haven't been completely unreceptive to that story. But after that first listen, you only get a 30-second sample unless you buy it, and you can buy it for 10 cents for streaming. So we tried to move the ball a little bit and have people rethink how music works in the cloud. And then what we did is we tried to really focus on creating an experience that was hard for the free services to compete with, because most of them are ad-supported, and in the end, you got a zero-sum game. There's only so many pixels on a screen. There's only so much audio that you can consume at one time. They are forced to compromise on the user experience, and we are not. So we believe we can create a really extraordinary experience, and we think in the end people will pay for quality. There's lots of examples of people paying for quality. One that's near and dear to my heart because it was the first truly successful premium service we launched at Yahoo was Yahoo Personals. A little known fact, Yahoo Personals existed for a long time as a free service. It was the #1 personal site on the net. It was cool. They made about $10 million a year. Every one of that $10 million came from Match.com, who was making about $50 million a year. We looked at that and said something's wrong. Why is it that our cool free service, which has more users than them, makes a lot less money? They seem to be riding off our back. So we launched a free service, and in a year we were making $44 million. They were making 100, which was too bad, but it was better than 10. Why? Why did a for-pay service work better than a free service? Because, you know, if you're looking for someone to date, you really appreciate the fact that they could pay $35. So far, so good. You know, we don't have an easy road. There's a lot of resonance. We get a lot of comments like, oh my God, I don't need to use iTunes anymore. This is great. But it's tough because we're competing against free. And that's a tough road. We have to continually make our case. So, conclusion here is that the vast majority of media is free, from news to video and even to music. And it's clearly transforming these industries. It's transforming their delivery mechanisms, and their mechanisms of monetization are radically being disrupted. And it's all different than it was in the past. So I'm going to wrap up here relatively quickly by talking about what this might mean for an entrepreneur. It might make you climb the walls. That's actually a picture of 2 of the founders of Lala. And this is something that we do discuss until we are blue and red in the face. So my first point, and this isn't perhaps even useful saying, but I got a cool slide for it, so I'm going to say it. It's blindingly obvious. You ignore the possibility, Anderson would say the probability, of free at your peril. You must ask whether free could happen, and you must build your business with the assumption that it might. Now, must is too strong there. It depends, and there's different kinds of free, and it depends on what you're selling and what the fundamental costs behind it are. But you have to ask yourself that question, in my view, in any case. Remember, consumer loves free. They do. They do. We all do. We love free. If nothing else, remember, free is the most disruptive force out there today. It can change your model. And if someone can figure out how to be free, you got to worry. So how and when will free happen? So a couple of boring slides. We talked about the marginal cost going to 0. So it almost doesn't matter what your infrastructure costs are behind that. If the marginal costs go to 0, you got an issue to think about. Think hard about it. Is there a third-party payer model? You could be charging for search, and that's all great, but if Google can come along and make scads of dollars selling advertising and offer it for free, who's the consumer going to use? Obvious. Third thing to think about, very important, if there's a disruptive large player who can offer your service for free because of a secondary benefit, you better watch out. Is your service or product replicatable? Well, that's maybe a fear of piracy. Maybe it's a fear that there'll be a philosophical problem people will having paying for something that's replicatable. And lastly, kind of obvious. I know a lot of this is Business 101. Is it a consumer business? Because I actually thought of having a slide that has business loving money. They like to pay. Enterprises generally like to pay. There's a lot of good reasons for that. So, when can you make it pay? Of course. Is it a service or a product? Is your information unique and hard to replicate? Are there what I call quality effects? Consumers will gravitate to quality. Now, they will make compromises for free. And you might find yourself with a niche business, but like Match.com found out, it might be a smaller number of people, but they're likely to be far, far, far more profitable. Are there network effects? Can you build a sustainable advantage with those network effects? Can you build a sustainably differentiated experience? If the other guy has to have ads and you don't, can you make enough of a difference? Can that differentiation actually change consumers' minds? In the end, are the fixed delivery costs per user. Let's think about this in music. Let's think about the math. It costs somewhere between a half a penny and a penny to stream a song on demand, depending on the deal you get with the labels. That means for each song offered, you have to have between a $5 and $10 CPM if you're advertising supported. Good luck. Right? Good luck. And lastly, can you turn this around and create a freemium service? So how do you survive if it goes to free? You go to advertising, you figure out freemium. Anyway, you can get scale and then get sold pretty fast. In the end, all your calculations are going to come down to, let's do that math. What's it going to cost me to serve this marginal n+1 user? And what revenue can I possibly, now and in the future, earn? In my opinion, in music, the two will never meet if you're thinking it's going to be advertising, because that price will never come down low enough. And in your good or service, that's what you need to take into account. I thought it'd be interesting to look at there's so many examples of free versus paid. It's not quite fair, but you know, RIM makes a whole lot of money selling email, and you know, boy, that hurts to see as one of the creators of Yahoo Mail how much money they really make. Really interesting case that was recently written about in the New York Times. Free came back to personals. How did it come back? Well, because it's a dude. It's a guy. He said, well, look at that Yahoo Personals model. They were making like $10 million a year just promoting Match.com. $10 million a year, that sounds pretty good. So that's what he did. And very quickly, he was making $10 million a year doing personals in his apartment. And now I think it's more like 20 or more. Who gets this one? New York Times free, Wall Street Journal for pay. All right, me neither. MySpace versus Lala. There are many, many more examples. Zillow.com versus Realtor.com. They're all out there for you to look at. It's actually interesting. You know, this free experiment, that you can map these various things I've been talking about, has been done in real life over time. Anyone remember Dialpad? Dialpad? Free long distance. Free real long distance to real phones. How did they do it? Well, they paid a penny per call, per minute. It's cool. At Yahoo, we said, that's really great. They're getting so many users. We'll do it. We did. We had a white-labeled Dialpad service. It was awesome. It cost us $4 million after about a month. And we shut it down. Remember Net Zero? Free internet access. Awesome. They charge $10 a month for that now. And there's others, right? There's a lot of successes in free that are probably not worth talking about. And there's a lot where it's a little too early to tell. What's your favorite example? Twitter, maybe? Twitter? YouTube, I guess. Yes. Ning? So, I thought I'd leave you with, I mentioned Stuart Brand, who's the Whole Earth catalog guy who at, I guess, the 1984 Hackers Conference gave this quote. And interestingly, it's only the first part that's ever really quoted. Information wants to be free. But there's a second part. Information also wants to be expensive. And we all know that that's true. It's interesting that it's left off. So I'll read it real quick. Information wants to be free because it has become so cheap to distribute, copy, and recombine. Too cheap to meter. It wants to be expensive because it can be immeasurably valuable to the recipient. That tension will not go away. And that's the tension we've been talking about all night. It leads to endless wrenching debate about price, copyright, intellectual property, the moral rightness of casual distribution, because each round of new devices makes the tension worse, not better. I'd say that was pretty prescient back in 1984 to have that conversation. So that's it. So welcome to the sometimes free world, and enjoy it. Thank you very much.
Very quickly, we ask me one question and one question only. That person takes the responsibility for the entire room for being relevant and brief. Emphasis on the second part. So, a burning question that has to be awesome. Who's brave enough to ask it? There it is, Sean Ellis. Please, have at it.
No, that's the wrong one.
Do you think free favors startups or established companies?
Does free favor startups or established companies? That was a softball. Free, as I said, is the most disruptive force. You know, I'm not saying that. Bill Gurley's saying that. Chris Anderson's saying that. But I think it is obviously true. Startups don't get disrupted. You guys disrupt. Now, this being said, an established company can disrupt you with free. Don't get me wrong. But I'll always lean in your direction because an established company is going to build a cash cow. Let me give you a quick example, even though it doesn't quite fit. When I was at Yahoo, we had this really cool premium mail service. We gave away 10 megabytes of storage, 10 megabytes, for free. And then we charged something like $100 a year for 100 meg and varying amounts. And it was tens of millions of dollars that essentially went right to the bottom line because, as you all know, that storage was pretty darn cheap. And then we heard that this startup, okay, it was Google, it wasn't a startup, was going to release an email product. We heard in advance. We knew in advance. It's in Chris Anderson's book. Although they didn't mention me there, which kind of hurt. They mentioned the guys who worked for me, Brad Garlinghouse and Dave Nakayama. So I actually have to have a conversation with them. We heard they were going to come out with 1 gig for free. Now, why is that like a startup disrupting an established player? And why was it disruptive? Well, at the time, we had about 150 million active email accounts. They had 0. Starting with 0 and giving them a gig, pretty darn cheap. Starting with 150 million accounts and giving them all a gig, oh, that's a painful conversation with your COO. You know, okay, so this $10 million business, or this tens of millions of dollar business, it goes right to the bottom line. Guess what? It's over. And now we got to talk about capital expense. It's going to be fun. That's disruptive. And that was a lot more like a startup. That's the advantage that a startup has in going for free.